Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When Mike bought a quiet house off the grid, he expected peace, not war, but a power-hungry HOA president named Karen had other plans. What began with letters quickly escalated to threats, surveillance, and a loaded gun at his door. She wanted control. He chose to fight. I never bought property to make friends. I bought it to breathe. That's what I kept telling myself as I drove up the winding, tree-lined road to my new home, my first real retreat from the city and the noise and the bureaucratic parasites that came with both. The house sat like an old lion at rest, elegant, quiet, built of real stone and wood, none of that composite garbage they use in the suburbs, 42 acres of woodland and private ridgeline, the kind of place you look at once and never forget. It had been vacant for over a year, abandoned after some messy inheritance battle, but I didn't care. I had the deed, the plans, and the will to turn it into a legacy. From the very beginning, I was aware of the HOA hovering next door. Canyon Hills. Sounded peaceful, it wasn't. Just a neighborhood of oversized beige boxes, rigid hedges, and bored residents playing at politics. When I reviewed the parcel map with my lawyer during closing, I asked him 3 times, "Are you absolutely certain this land is not under HOA jurisdiction?" He laughed and pointed to the highlighted lot lines. "You're as free as it gets, Mike. They can't touch you." Famous last words. The first letter came less than 2 weeks after I moved in. I found it taped to my gate, unbranded, but phrased with the passive-aggressive scent of bureaucracy. It welcomed me to the greater community of Canyon Hills and strongly encouraged me to review the HOA's aesthetic guidelines for property continuity and visual harmony. I almost laughed. Then I saw the name at the bottom, Karen Logan, President. That set off an internal alarm. I'd heard of her reputation during escrow, neighbors calling her the Duchess, the Enforcer, and my favorite, the HOA Commandant. I took a red marker, wrote "not interested" across the paper, and taped it back to the gate. The second letter was less polite. It came via certified mail. This time, the envelope was formal with HOA letterhead and a summary of alleged infractions, non-standard perimeter fencing, unregistered construction activity, and, I kid you not, inconsistent mailbox design. My favorite line was the demand to remedy the above discrepancies within 30 days to avoid community fines. I photocopied it, sent a return letter stating that my property was outside the HOA's jurisdiction, included copies of the deed, parcel map, and a nice little clause from county zoning law that clarified their lack of authority. I also added a postscript, "Please direct all future nonsense to my attorney. His name is Bob. He's meaner than I am." A few days later, I noticed a woman standing at the edge of my gravel drive, arms crossed, sunglasses low on her nose. She didn't wave. She stared. I stared back. I didn't need a name tag to know who it was. She had the look of someone who'd filed a noise complaint about birds. I walked to the gate and nodded. "Can I help you?" She didn't smile. "I'm Karen Logan. I oversee Canyon Hills." HOA sighed. "Mike Dorn, I oversee this property." She blinked at that, clearly unused to anything less than immediate obedience. "We've noticed some inconsistencies. The fencing is non-compliant with our neighborhood guidelines and your utility van." "Karen," I interrupted, "this lot isn't part of Canyon Hills. Your HOA doesn't apply here. I have all the paperwork." She held up a folder like a judge reading charges. "Our maps show this parcel as part of the broader community." "Your maps are wrong," I said, more amused than angry. "This house was built in the late 70s. Your development popped up 20 years later. I'm not inside your lines. My lawyer and title officer made sure of that. You can check with the county registrar." She pressed her lips into a line. "Mr. Dorn, most of our neighbors have chosen to participate voluntarily. It's for the greater good. We expect all residents to contribute to community standards." "That's great," I said. "I'm not most residents, and this land is mine, not yours." "Not the board's. Mine." She didn't blink. Non-participation reflects poorly on the spirit of unity here. "Then it's a good thing I don't live in your utopia." She turned and walked off without another word, her posture tight as rebar. As I watched her disappear around the curve of the road, I had the distinct feeling this was not the end of our conversations. I stood there a moment longer, then headed back to the house. I had floors to strip and walls to repaint. Besides, I'd dealt with worse than a neighborhood Napoleon in khakis. But still, I triple-checked my locks that night. It didn't take long for the tone to shift. Within a week of Karen's visit, I received 3 more notices, each one a little more pointed than the last. This time, they weren't bothering with friendly invitations. The first arrived folded and wedged under my windshield wiper while I was unloading lumber from my truck. A printed sheet in bold font. You are in direct violation of community standards. Failure to engage with the HOA will result in escalating consequences. No name, no signature, just the HOA logo, centered at the top like a rubber stamp from the Ministry of Conformity. I showed it to Bob, my lawyer, over the phone that afternoon. He laughed. These people are like Jehovah's Witnesses with subpoenas. Keep everything. Scan it. Print backups. If they want to escalate, let them hang themselves with the rope they've woven. I followed his advice. Every letter went into a manila folder marked Canyon Clowns. I also backed it all up to the cloud, 2 external drives, and 1 old-school USB thumbstick. Decades in law enforcement had made me paranoid, but paranoia is just good foresight with better record-keeping. The next morning, I noticed something odd. My mailbox door had been left open. Inside was a rolled-up community notice and what looked like a citation for a non-permitted vehicle parked on gravel. The vehicle in question, my own truck, parked in my own driveway, on private property. The document threatened a $75 daily fine, beginning retroactively 5 days ago, which was curious considering I don't pay dues and didn't sign a single HOA agreement. Still, the paper looked official enough to fool someone less stubborn than me. That same day, I found a second notice nailed to the oak tree near my front gate. Yes, nailed, hammered into living wood like I was the villain in a fairy tale, and Karen was some HOA witch declaring a curse. The paper read, "You're in material breach of visual standards. Roofline paintwork must be adjusted to match community palette." I didn't know what the community palette was, but if it didn't include blood red and sarcasm gray, I wasn't interested. I ripped the notice off, took a photo of the nail still embedded in the bark, and emailed it to Bob. Later that evening, as I sat on the porch with a coffee and a growing migraine, my neighbor Rick wandered over with a 6-pack and a concerned look. Rick was a Vietnam vet, the kind of guy who didn't scare easy, but even he kept his voice low. "Mike, I heard you told Karen to go to hell." "Not in so many words. I just told her she didn't own my land." Rick sat down, passed me a beer. "She's not used to that. Most people fold. She plays the long game. Had one guy fired over a landscaping permit. Another family sold their house after months of anonymous citations." I frowned. "And everyone just lets that happen?" Rick shrugged. "People don't have time to fight. Most think it's easier to just fall in line. But you're different. You've got paperwork. Fire in the gut. She's not gonna like that." I took a long pull from the beer and said nothing. The next morning, I noticed a dark sedan parked across the road, windows tinted, engine off, just sitting there. 2 men inside pretending to check a clipboard and something on a tablet. I stepped onto the porch with my phone raised, pretending to snap landscape photos. The car pulled away within 10 seconds. No license plate visible from the front, just a black blur. Later that day, I got a call from an inspector claiming to represent the Canyon Hills Architectural Oversight Committee. He wanted to schedule a walkthrough of my property to ensure compliance with the latest amendments. I let him finish his script, then asked for his badge number, full name, and county registration. He hung up. That night, a motion light behind my garage flicked on at 1:32 in the morning. The footage showed nothing but a shadow moving along the tree line. I reviewed the video frame by frame. There was a brief flash of a figure holding something long and metallic, maybe a clipboard, maybe a camera, maybe something worse. I sent the clip to Bob and installed 2 more cameras before sunrise. 3 days later, Karen showed up again, this time in full suburban battle dress, pastel blazer, pearl necklace, and a binder the size of a phone book. She rang the bell, stood perfectly centered in my porch camera's frame, and waited with a practiced smile. When I opened the door, she began without a greeting. "Mr. Dorn, this is your final opportunity to enter into good standing with the community. Continued defiance will result in legal action." I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "You're trespassing again." She didn't blink. "I represent the HOA. My presence is sanctioned." "Not here, it isn't," I said. "This land isn't yours to govern." She held up the binder and clicked it open. We believe this parcel falls within the expanded boundary map filed 2 years ago. Karen, I cut in. I have the original plot and recorded maps. County Register confirms I'm exempt. You don't own me, and you sure as hell don't scare me. Her smile faltered for a split second. Non-compliance will be interpreted as obstruction. I suggest you interpret this instead. Get off my land. She hesitated, then turned and walked away slowly, binder clutched tight like a holy book. I watched her disappear again. This time not just with indignation, but something colder, calculated, like she was reconfiguring her next move. I didn't know what was coming, but I knew damn well it wouldn't be a letter. By the time Saturday rolled around, I was ready for something, anything that didn't involve property lines, bylaws, or the looming specter of HOA hell. I hadn't taken a real weekend in weeks, so I invited a few old friends over for a small gathering. Nothing wild, just grilled steaks, a cold cooler, and a solid excuse to laugh without looking over my shoulder. A few of them had served with me back in my law enforcement days, but 4 were retired Marines, men you'd never want to be on the wrong side of, especially when they were sober. And trust me, that evening, they were very, very sober. We were out back on the patio around 7, steaks already sizzling, the smoke curling into the trees like incense. The mood was relaxed. We'd been talking shop, security systems, new case law, idiot bureaucrats, and trading stories from old deployments. One of the guys, Foster, had just finished consulting for a federal base in Arizona and was showing me new footage of perimeter drones when the doorbell rang. It didn't chime. It buzzed. Sharp, urgent, like someone was holding the button down too long. I was halfway through a sip of bourbon when the second ring came, followed by a heavy knock. I glanced toward the front camera feed on the tablet propped near the grill, expecting maybe a delivery or a lost hiker. Instead, it was Karen, alone, in a cream-colored trench coat, holding a folder in one hand and a small black pistol in the other. I froze, not panicked, just still. Her hand wasn't raised, but the weapon was unmistakable. A compact Glock, probably a 26 or 27. I knew the silhouette like an old friend. Foster, I said quietly, my eyes still locked on the feed. You and Bryce flank around the east side. Karen's at my front door, armed. Foster didn't ask questions. He nodded once and was gone. Bryce followed without a word. I walked calmly to the door and opened it halfway. She stood there like a queen of suburban tyranny, the barrel of the gun angled just enough to suggest she thought it made her look serious. "Mike," she said, her voice brittle but coldly confident. "We're past letters. You've had your chances. I need you to sign these papers. Right now." I glanced at the folder. It was one of those pre-filled HOA contracts, probably with forged dates and witness fields already populated. Her eyes didn't blink. "This isn't a joke," she continued. "I have friends in the county office. I can make things happen, and I can make people disappear off property rolls. You want your land? You sign. Or this gets ugly." I didn't move. I didn't blink. I just stared at her. "Karen," I said, "that is a very, very bad idea." She scoffed. "You don't get to play tough anymore. You push too far. You think you're special, untouchable? This whole place, your land, your rights, they're a mirage. One phone call, and I can bury you in zoning violations for a decade. One trigger pull, and—" She didn't finish. The front door flew open from behind me as Foster's forearm wrapped around her weapon hand, twisting it down with practiced, brutal precision. At the same time, Bryce moved in from her left, grabbing the folder from her grip and forcing her onto one knee. It took under 2 seconds. She didn't even have time to scream. The gun clattered to the porch tiles. The folder fluttered open, pages scattering in the wind like trash. Karen made this choked little gasp, more disbelief than pain, as Foster zip-tied her wrists behind her back and rolled her onto her side, checking for other weapons. Bryce retrieved the pistol, dropped the magazine, cleared the chamber, and handed the weapon to me. I crouched beside her. "You brought a loaded weapon to my house, Karen," I said quietly, and pointed it at me, over a contract I didn't sign. "Do you realize what that means?" She didn't respond. Her face was pale. Her mouth worked silently, like her brain was trying to reboot. "We have the whole thing on camera," I added. 3 angles, audio and visual, plus 2 body cams. She tried to speak, but all that came out was, I was. "Save it for the cops," Foster said, standing up. I dialed. "Yeah," I told dispatch, voice steady. "Canyon Ridge. 1 detained female, attempted coercion with a firearm. No injuries. Weapon recovered and secured. Yes, we'll wait." I watched her as I hung up. She was shaking now, not crying, just vibrating, like a dying wasp. Behind me, the Marines stood silent, ready, unbothered. Karen had walked into a different world than the one she ruled with citations and bylaws. She had brought a bluff to a battlefield and found out too late that some of us don't bluff. The flashing lights bounced off the trees long before the cruiser came into view. I stood near the gate, arms crossed, watching the blue and red kaleidoscope spin across my driveway like a sick carnival. Karen sat on the stone bench near the porch, wrists still restrained, lips bloodless. The Marines stayed out of sight, per my request. Last thing I needed was some rookie showing up and panicking at the sight of 4 large men in tactical posture. Foster and the others melted into the house, though I had no doubt they were still watching through the windows, ready to move. The patrol car rolled to a stop. 2 officers stepped out. One was young, maybe 26, clean-shaven and rigid. The other was older, balding, jaded, with the walk of someone who'd written too many trespass reports and didn't want one more. His eyes met mine and narrowed slightly. "Mr. Dorn?" he asked. "That's me," I replied, stepping forward. The woman seated is Karen Logan. She approached my house armed with a loaded firearm, demanded I sign documents under duress. She was disarmed and restrained, no injuries. Weapons been cleared and is in a secure case inside. The younger officer moved toward Karen. "Ma'am, are you injured?" She barely looked up. "I was attacked," she muttered. "I'm the president of the Homeowners Association. They ambushed me." "He assaulted me," I sighed. "We have full video from 3 surveillance cameras, body cams on the men who intervened, and audio of her threats. You'll see she approached alone and drew the weapon." The older officer gave me a long look, then nodded. "We'll need to see that footage." "Of course, it's queued up inside." As they reviewed the video, Karen sat hunched like a fallen statue, deflated but stubborn. When the officers emerged, their expressions had shifted. The younger one looked stiff, uncomfortable. The older one, Officer Alvarez, according to his nameplate, was stone-cold calm. He turned to Karen. "Ma'am, you're under arrest for assault with a deadly weapon, attempted coercion under threat, and unlawful trespass. Stand up." Karen didn't move. She stared at the porch tiles like they owed her an apology. "Stand." Up, eventually she rose, wobbly. They didn't unbind her, just resecured the zip ties with official cuffs and read her rights. She didn't argue, didn't cry, just kept muttering, "You don't understand." He was breaking the rules. He's not part of the community. Alvarez turned to me as they guided her to the cruiser. "We'll need a formal statement and access to all footage. Do you want to press charges?" "Absolutely," I said. "And you may want to check her vehicle." He nodded. "Already planning to." They searched the car, her shiny black Range Rover parked off to the side like it belonged there. It was unlocked. Inside the glove box, they found a handgun permit, expired, and 2 more copies of the HOA membership contract. In the back seat, a file box labeled in Sharpie, "Compliance Logs." That box was a gold mine. Inside were dozens of folders, each marked with a resident's name. Most were full of citations, photos, even annotated maps, but a handful had something far worse. Letters addressed to employers, school boards, mortgage lenders. One folder had a note clipped to the front. "Target do not let escape." My name was on it. Officer Alvarez flipped through the contents and raised an eyebrow. "This woman's been compiling intelligence." I crossed my arms. "Looks like coercion with intent to defame. Possibly stalking. Can we get that box secured?" "Already bagged," he said, motioning to the younger cop who was pulling on gloves. Karen, now in the back of the cruiser, caught my eye as they shut the door. Her look wasn't angry anymore. It was something else, something quieter, like she had just realized the game wasn't going the way it always had. Alvarez handed me a receipt for the weapon and footage copy. "Detectives will follow up. Expect a call in the morning." And, for what it's worth, that was handled clean. Real clean. "Not my first rodeo." "I figured." He hesitated. "We've had complaints about that HOA before, but no one's ever had the guts. Or the proof." "Well," I said, watching the cruiser pull away, "now we've got both." As silence returned to the driveway, Foster stepped out from the shadows with a look that hovered between amusement and grim satisfaction. "She really brought a gun?" he asked. "To a contract negotiation." "Yep," I said, shaking my head. "And a file system." We all laughed. Not because it was funny, but because sometimes that's all you can do when things get so insane they loop back around to comedy. But beneath the laughter, I could feel the tension building. Karen was just the beginning. That box, that was a roadmap to something bigger. The next morning, I was already 3 cups deep into my coffee when Bob called. I didn't even get a hello. "She pointed a gun at you?" he barked. "She did," I said, calm as you please. Compact Glock. Probably meant to scare, not shoot, but she brought it chambered. You know, just in case. Jesus, Mike. And you've got the footage? 3 angles and 2 body cams. Plus, her car was a gold mine. The cops pulled a box of documents that make Nixon's files look like a teenager's diary. He paused. How many names? Dozens. At least 20 I could count on the fly. Citations, fake violation notices, employment records, letters to schools, and city code enforcement. And guess whose folder was labeled Target Do Not Let Escape? Bob didn't even ask. "I'm dispatching a private investigator," he said. "And a forensic accountant. You want to take this to court, we'll bury her. You want to go public, we'll burn the whole HOA. I chuckled. How about both? That afternoon, the investigator arrived. Name was Hendricks, ex-DEA. Looked like a librarian. Moved like a wolf. He set up a small station in my den and immediately began cross-referencing names from the files we scanned overnight. Meanwhile, I put out a message to the neighbors, quietly. I printed 20 letters, folded them neatly, and hand-delivered them in the early morning while everyone else was still groggy and nursing HOA fatigue. Each one read, "You may be entitled to restitution. If you've received undue pressure, threats, or citations from the Canyon Hills HOA or from Karen Logan directly, please contact me confidentially. Legal assistance is available and you will not be publicly named without consent." I left my number and a burner email. Then I waited. I didn't have to wait long. By that evening, I had 12 emails and 6 voicemails, some short, others full-on confessions. One woman said Karen threatened to call Child Protective Services because her kid played soccer too close to the sidewalk. Another man described how he was fined into bankruptcy over non-compliant garden sculptures. A family with an elderly father told me they'd been given 3 violations in a week while the man was recovering from surgery. And when they refused to pay, Karen allegedly told their mortgage lender they were delinquent and in community dispute. Hendricks documented everything. We started organizing testimonies, anonymizing data, and building a timeline. I spoke with each resident directly. Most were scared, really scared. Not of Karen physically, but of what she could do. Report them to the city, sabotage permits, flood them with fees. She'd cultivated fear like a crop, harvested compliance season after season. One man, a retired teacher named Howard, sat across from me with shaking hands and said, "I thought I was going crazy. I thought I was the only one." "You weren't," I told him, "and we were just getting started." By the end of the week, the number had climbed to 23. 23 people with specific documented instances of HOA intimidation, many involving forged warnings, unannounced inspections, or outright threats. I made sure they knew they weren't alone, and that this wasn't just about revenge. It was about finally stopping someone who had treated their power like a private kingdom. Bob and Hendricks went deeper. Using some of the files recovered from Karen's car, they identified one specific connection that raised every red flag in the book. A landscaping company called Green Reach, which had been paid out over $120,000 in HOA funds over the past year for beautification projects, except Green Reach didn't exist. Their listed business address was a UPS drop box in a strip mall. The accountant dug further. Payments were routed through a series of shell vendors, all tied to the same tax ID used by Karen's nephew 2 years ago in a real estate scam. It was fraud. Open, greasy, tax-dodging fraud. We put it all into a clean, no-nonsense packet. Witness statements, financial tracing, copies of the letters, screenshots of bank flows, the entire mess. Then Bob sent it to the district attorney's office with a single note. "Please advise if this constitutes enough for a grand jury." Meanwhile, I decided the neighborhood needed something more direct, more visible. I printed a large banner and mounted it between the brick pillars at my gate. It read, "This property is not part of the HOA. All HOA harassment is being investigated as criminal activity. Trespassers will be prosecuted." Within hours, it was the talk of the neighborhood. Some people passed by and waved. Others averted their eyes. But one woman knocked on my door around dusk, tears in her eyes, and whispered, "Thank you," for saying it out loud. I didn't sleep much that night, not out of fear, but momentum. For the first time since buying this place, I felt like I wasn't just defending my land. I was cutting the roots of something rotten that had spread far deeper than anyone wanted to admit. And I had a feeling Karen's crusade had only just begun to unravel. The subpoena hit like a thunderclap. 3 days after we submitted the evidence packet, Bob got a call from the county DA's office. They weren't just interested, they were very interested. By that afternoon, a judge had issued preliminary subpoenas for the HOA's financial records, internal communications, and board member contracts. Karen was already in custody, held without bail on weapons and coercion charges, but now the net was widening. That evening, I stood at the end of my driveway, sipping a fresh cup of coffee, as 3 unmarked sedans rolled into Canyon Hills and parked in front of the HOA office building, the charming faux brick monstrosity at the center of the community. Usually adorned with plastic seasonal wreaths and passive-aggressive signage about lawn lengths. A few residents peeked through curtains. One even filmed from behind a potted plant. The agents went inside and stayed there for hours. They left with 8 boxes of paper files, 3 hard drives, and 1 computer tower that looked older than most of the residents. The next morning, I woke up to find a letter slid under my door. No envelope, just a single page. "You've made powerful enemies. People are watching. Not everyone's happy about what you're doing. This isn't over. No name, no signature. Cheap inkjet." The kind of thing someone thinks is threatening until you've read thousands of them before. I slipped it into a Ziploc bag, labeled it, and handed it to Hendricks. "Local?" he asked. "Almost certainly. No one from outside the neighborhood knows I sleep with the alarm sensors active." Then we're escalating. He spent the rest of the day installing new motion cameras along my back perimeter, swapping out my Wi-Fi router with a secure tunnel device, and placing a small magnetic tracker detector on the underside of my truck, just in case. We weren't being paranoid. That same evening, Bryce noticed a black SUV parked across from my place with tinted windows and no front plate. It stayed for over 2 hours and then drove off without headlights. Hendricks managed to capture the plate from a hidden camera as it turned the corner. A quick database search traced it to an LLC registered in Nevada, one that showed up in our earlier scan of shell vendors used by Karen's fake landscaping scam. It wasn't just her anymore. This thing had tendrils. Bob and the accountant kept digging. They found that in the past 4 years, over $480,000 had been funneled through HOA special project invoices into accounts controlled by shell entities. One, hilariously, was registered under the name Elite Neighborhood Optimization Group. Its listed purpose, community harmony enforcement, which to me sounded like the motto of a cartoon villain. Meanwhile, more residents began to talk. One couple confessed they were told their adoption application might be delayed if they didn't comply with HOA painting guidelines because Karen had friends on the review board. Another woman revealed she'd been forced to host voluntary meetings in her living room under threat of being labeled non-cooperative in HOA status reports. Status reports, like this was some Cold War suburb. By the end of the week, our growing evidence matrix included documented financial fraud with itemized laundering paths, over 24 testimonies of coercion, threats, and reputational sabotage, 3 shell corporations used as contractors with no real services rendered, multiple documented instances of forged notices and manipulated citations, surveillance footage of Karen's attempted coercion with a firearm, the anonymous threat left at my home, and now, evidence of possible surveillance or intimidation from outside parties. At this point, even the FBI was sniffing around. I got the call from an agent named Marshall. He was polite, calm, and far too specific in his questioning to be local. "We're tracking a pattern," he said. "Similar abuses in other HOAs. Same style, same shell companies, same enforcement language." "Copycat or syndicate?" I asked. He didn't answer, just said, "Keep everything secure." You've rattled something bigger than a suburban dictatorship, which oddly made me smile. For the first time in years, I felt like I was doing more than just defending my own land. I was blowing the whistle on a whole ecosystem of rot that had been growing behind faux brick walls and holiday banners. Of course, it also meant things were about to get messier. I sat in the courthouse hallway, suit pressed, tie crooked, deliberately. I never liked looking too polished in front of a jury. Makes you look like you're hiding something. Let the prosecution wear their designer armor. I wanted to look like what I was, a man who got tired of watching people be bullied and decided to push back. Karen was already in the courtroom, flanked by her lawyer and 2 new board members, both trying very hard not to make eye contact with anyone. She looked older, smaller, like someone who'd been deflated but refused to crumple. Still, the fire was there, tight in the jaw, twitch in the lip. She wasn't done fighting, not by a long shot. The case wasn't just about the gun anymore. That was the spark. But the fire had spread. Fraud, extortion, conspiracy, unlawful surveillance, abuse of authority. And worst of all, a charge that even I didn't expect to stick, but somehow did. Organized racketeering under RICO statutes. Turns out, when you run an HOA like a mob, with shell companies, extortion, financial laundering, and retaliation, you qualify for the big leagues. Bob and the DA worked together. The case was airtight. Witness after witness took the stand. Elderly residents who shook as they read the letters Karen had sent them. Families who'd nearly lost their homes. A veteran who'd been threatened with foreclosure after refusing to sell his property at market-preferred value. Teachers, parents, single mothers, each telling a story that sounded, on the surface, like suburban drama, but underneath was a latticework of calculated psychological warfare. Karen's defense tried everything. She was protecting the integrity of the neighborhood. She believed she was enforcing rules, not laws. The gun wasn't loaded. She never meant to hurt anyone. She was under pressure. She was set up, but none of it stuck. The video alone showed enough. Her words, her threats. The way she barked, "You have no idea what I can do," while waving the Glock like it was a badge of honor. Add to that the forensic accounting, the witness testimonies, the digital trails. It wasn't a case. It was an avalanche. The defense's final move was character witnesses. 3 people from the HOA who swore she'd always been firm but fair. All 3 had been on the payroll of one of the fake contractors. We had the bank transfers. Bob brought the receipts. Literally. Then came my turn. I stepped onto the stand and looked straight at the jury. I bought that property to get away from people like Karen. People who think rules give them the right to dominate. Who think power means permission. And I let it slide. Until she brought a gun to my front door. That wasn't an HOA president acting on policy. That was a tyrant trying to force obedience. I wasn't the first. I just happened to be the first with cameras and friends who didn't scare easy. I told them everything. The folders, the threats, the surveillance, the fake companies, the letter under my door. I kept it clean, controlled, but I didn't hold back. When I stepped down, Karen wouldn't look at me. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. I expected at least a day, but the foreman looked pale when they returned, like they'd seen something they couldn't unsee. Maybe it was the files. Maybe it was her voice on tape. Maybe it was the sheer volume of abuse. They found her guilty on all major counts: racketeering, fraud, extortion, threat with a deadly weapon, trespassing, abuse of authority, coercion, obstruction. The judge didn't waste time. 15 years, no parole for at least 10, and a court order to dissolve the Canyon Hills HOA board immediately. As the bailiff escorted Karen out, she glanced at me for the first time since the arrest. Her eyes were hollow, not angry, not sad, just vacant, like she couldn't believe it was real, like she thought this world still ran on fear and threats, and the courtroom had somehow glitched the simulation. I stepped outside into the sun. I don't remember if I smiled. I do remember Bob handing me a manila folder. "Open it," he said. Inside was a copy of the class action filing. 23 plaintiffs, claims totaling nearly $3 million in damages. Civil court was next. But before that, we had something else to do. The civil trial wasn't dramatic, not like the criminal one. No handcuffs, no jury gasps, no tearful testimonies. Just rows of lawyers in tailored suits, piles of paper, and numbers, so many numbers, projected on a screen in the stale gray courtroom of the district's civil division. Karen didn't show up. Her attorney, gaunt and exhausted, admitted liability on her behalf for the purpose of settlement negotiations. No fight left. Just terms, damages, closure. Of the 23 plaintiffs, all received compensation, some more than others, based on the scale of abuse, the paper trail, and the extent of harm. The total payout was just north of $3.2 million. Bob negotiated the terms like a surgeon, precise, calculated, surgical. I barely said a word. I didn't need to. Afterward, Bob handed me one more document, one I hadn't expected. Your request to acquire the defunct HOA's land parcels. Approved, he said. They had 2 vacant plots zoned as community spaces. You now own both. Just like that? I asked, stunned. Not quite. You still paid $1. It's official. So I bought the land. 2 neglected, overgrown lots, one tucked behind the HOA office, the other sandwiched between a cul-de-sac and the nature reserve that ran along the ridge. They were supposed to be parks, but never got past the future development signs. I knew exactly what to do with them. 3 months later, after clearing permits and bringing in a team of my own design contacts, we broke ground on what would become the Garden of Reclamation. That's what the brass plaque reads at the entrance. Beneath it, in honor of those who stood up, spoke out, and reclaimed their peace. There's no swing set, no fountain, just quiet benches, walking paths, native trees, and a small sculpture at the center, a twisted abstract metal form shaped like a shattered crown. Bryce made it. He called it the Fall of HOA Kings. I didn't argue. The second parcel? That became a resource center. Not a building, just a solar-powered kiosk with a digital directory of legal rights, links to free housing attorneys, and a hotline for HOA-related abuse. I made sure it updated weekly with public case results, violations of code, and homeowner protections under state law. It even includes a copy of my testimony on video with a simple caption, "Don't sign out of fear." I didn't want attention, but attention came anyway. Local papers picked up the story, then regional outlets. Then a national podcast did a series on the Tyrant of Canyon Hills. They interviewed me, Bryce, and even some of the residents. They blurred the faces, changed the names, but the message stuck. In the months that followed, similar stories came out of other towns, other HOAs, other Karens, and every time someone emailed me the link. "You started something," they'd write. No, I didn't start it. I just stopped ignoring it. One afternoon, a local official showed up with a certificate, Citizen Commendation for Civil Courage. I didn't hang it in the house. It's framed next to the kiosk under solar glass. People deserve to see what civil courage actually looks like. Do I still live in that house? Damn right I do. It's quieter now, not just from the absence of Karen's SUVs, but from something deeper. Peace, real peace, isn't silence. It's the absence of fear, and for the first time since I moved here, people smile when they walk their dogs past my gate. Kids wave instead of running. Neighbors stop to talk, not gossip, not to snitch, but to connect. Bryce and the others still drop by. We drink whiskey by the fire pit, tell the story again and again, laughing a little louder each time. And sometimes when I sit alone on the park bench under the lantern trees, I look out at the sculpture and smile to myself. She really brought a gun. She really thought that would work.